The four friends stood at the edge of Whisperwood, its gnarled branches clawing at the fading daylight. Locals claimed it was cursed, a place where the veil between worlds was thin and the dead could walk among the living. But they'd come to prove it was just an old wives' tale, or so they thought. This was supposed to be a fun weekend getaway. They'd planned this trip for months, but now the forest seemed to be closing in on them. It looked like something out of a nightmare, like the skeletal fingers of dead gods reaching for the sky. But they were here now, and turning back wasn't an option. Not only would their hike become longer and harder in the dark, but one of their own had scoffed at the legend of Whisperwood, daring anyone to stay till dawn. And no one wanted to chicken out first. They started their trek into the woods, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet of fallen leaves. The air grew colder, damper, heavy with the smell of decaying vegetation and wet earth. They pressed on, the silence of the forest pressing against them, broken only by their own nervous chatter. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, sent shivers down their spines. The setting sun bled through the dense canopy above, casting long, eerie shadows that danced and twisted around them. As darkness fell, the forest came alive with sound. Distant whispers brushed against their ears, like disembodied voices speaking in tongues they couldn't understand. Then there were footsteps, heavy, dragging themselves closer. They spun around, their flashlights cutting weak beams through the gloom, but saw nothing but trees, their twisted faces leering at them in the dim light. Their hearts pounded, their breaths shallow and quick. The feeling of being watched intensified. Then they saw it, a fleeting shadow that detached itself from the trees, a tall, gaunt figure with long, trailing limbs. It hesitated, then seemed to melt back into the forest. They stood frozen, their blood turning to ice in their veins. Was it a ghost? A creature from the dark folklore of the region? Or was it just their imaginations playing tricks on them? One of them tried to laugh, to break the suffocating tension, but it came out as a shaky, humorless sound. They started walking again, faster now, desperate to put as much distance between themselves and that apparition. But the forest seemed to stretch on forever, its twisted branches forming a labyrinth around them. They lost track of time, their fear growing with each passing moment. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, forming words they didn't want to hear, their worst fears being realized. Then they heard chains dragging metal moans that echoed through the trees, growing louder, closer. Panic surged through them, raw, untamed. They broke into a run, stumbling over roots and rocks, crashing through the underbrush. The sound of chains was coming from that way. It was too late to turn back now. There was nowhere left to go. They burst into a clearing and stopped short, their breath ragged, their eyes wide with terror. Before them stood an old abandoned cabin, its windows like vacant eye sockets staring back at them. The smell of damp wood and decay hung heavy around it. It looked like something out of a horror story, a place where nightmares took shape and evil lingered. But they had no choice. They needed shelter, somewhere to hide from the darkness that seemed to be seeping into their bones. They threw themselves against the heavy wooden door, pounding on it until their knuckles bled. It was locked, of course it was. With shaking hands, they searched for an entrance, a window to crawl through, anything to get them away from the sound of chains dragging closer, closer. They found a window, its glass long shattered and squeezed through the opening. Inside, it was pitch black, the air thick with dust and the stench of decay. They stumbled around in the darkness, their flashlights cutting weak beams through the gloom, revealing a dilapidated interior, furniture overturned, walls covered in strange symbols, and what looked like ritualistic scars. Then they saw it, etched into the floorboards, a pentagram surrounded by strange characters, like the key to some unspeakable mystery, or maybe a warning. They felt something then, a sudden drop in temperature, a prickling on the back of their necks, like unseen eyes boring into their souls. And then the whispers began, circling around them, growing louder, more insistent, weaving tales of pain and suffering, of sacrifices made and souls lost. The chains were closer now, dragging, clanking, a macabre symphony of torment. Something was out there, something evil and powerful, and it was stirring. They needed to get out, to escape the suffocating darkness of the cabin and the evil that seemed to ooze from its very pores. They rushed to the window, flinging themselves against it, desperate to escape the nightmare that had become their weekend getaway. But as they looked out into the night, their blood ran cold. The forest was gone. The trees had vanished, replaced by a swirling vortex of darkness that seemed to suck the very light from the world. It was a gateway, a portal to another realm, and it was opening right before their eyes. From its depths, they heard voices, screams, laughter, all mingling into a cacophony of despair. The chains were upon them now, wrapping around their legs, pulling them towards the darkness. They screamed, their voices echoing in the vast emptiness. But no one could hear them. No one could help them. They were trapped, imprisoned by an evil that had slumbered for centuries. With a final surge, the darkness pulled them through the portal, into the unknown. They tumbled out onto cold, hard ground, their bodies aching, their minds reeling. When they looked back, the cabin was gone, vanished into the swirling vortex along with everything they once knew. They were somewhere else, somewhere sinister, and they had no idea how to get back. They started to explore their surroundings, their hope dwindling with every step. The ground beneath their feet was hard and barren, devoid of any life, like the surface of some desolate planet. Above, there was no sky, only a swirling vortex of darkness that seemed to devour the very stars. They had no compass, no map, nothing to guide them. They were lost in a labyrinth of darkness with no way out. And then they saw it, a faint glimmer of light in the distance, a beacon of hope in the suffocating darkness. They struggled toward it, their steps faltering, their bodies racked with exhaustion. As they drew closer, the light grew brighter, revealing a sight that both terrified and mesmerized them. Before them stood a towering obelisk, its surface covered in strange symbols and glyphs, and at its base was a pool of water, reflecting the light of the moon like a shattered mirror. It was mesmerizing, hypnotic. They felt compelled to touch it, drawn to its otherworldly glow. But as they reached out, a voice boomed, echoing across the barren landscape, rich with power and menace. They turned to face the source of the voice, their hearts pounding in their chests, and saw a figure emerging from the darkness, tall and imposing, its features hidden in the shadows. Its eyes, though, burned with an eerie green light, piercing through the darkness and fixing on them with an intensity that sent shivers down their spines. As it stepped into the moonlight, they gasped. It was the gaunt figure they'd seen in the forest, the one that had melted away into the shadows. But now it was clear, its form solid, its presence palpable. It took another step forward, and the moonlight revealed more the tattered remnants of a long-forgotten uniform, the insignia barely discernible. But when they caught the glint of moonlight off its belt buckle, they saw it, the crest of a long-dead order, an emblem of a forgotten past. The forest held secrets, secrets that had slumbered for centuries, waiting to be unearthed by those who dared to disturb the peace of Whisperwood. Now they faced the consequences, trapped in a nightmare that had become all too real. They tried to speak, to beg for mercy, but their voices failed them. They were paralyzed with fear, unable to move, unable to speak, trapped in a nightmare that had become their reality. The figure advanced, its footsteps echoing across the barren landscape, drawing ever closer. In its hands, it held a staff, its tip glowing with an eerie green light. With each step it took, the light grew brighter, intensifying the shadows that danced around them, twisting and contorting into grotesque shapes. They felt the full force of its presence, heavy, oppressive, filled with an ancient, unfathomable power. As it loomed over them, they saw its face, gaunt, pale, with eyes that burned like embers in the night. They stared back, mesmerized, their fear giving way to a morbid fascination. In his hand, the staff pulsed with energy, its tip aimed directly at them. They braced for whatever fate awaited them, knowing that they had trespassed into realms that were not meant for mortal eyes. The forest had shown them its wrath, and now they faced the consequences of their actions. They had come seeking adventure, but they had found something far more terrifying, something that had been dormant for centuries, waiting to be awakened. And now the spirits of Whisperwood had risen,